Are genetic mutations really random? So is Darwinism correct, or is it rather Lamarckism? We will try to answer these and similar questions in today's episode of the series Secrets of Genes, in which I welcome you. My name is Eduard Kejnowski, and I work as a geneticist at the Institute of Biophysics of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Do mutations occur completely at random in our genomes? Or is randomness not so certain after all? It seems that the mutation of sleeping sickness calls the randomness of mutations into question. What is it about? The APOL1 gene, which is associated with resistance to sleeping sickness, addresses this fundamental question of evolution in favor of mutations that are not entirely random. It's as if it mutates into resistant variants more frequently where resistance is needed, that is, in Africa, where sleeping sickness occurs. Apolipoprotein L1, produced by the APOL1 gene, is a component of HDL, or good cholesterol. It is involved in a number of mechanisms in the body, and among other things, it is also closely related to sleeping sickness. It plays a role in immune defense against trypanosomes, specifically Trypanosoma brucei. It is also important whether the faulty allele appears in the genome once or twice. That is, whether we inherited it from only one parent or from both parents. If there is one faulty copy in the genome and the individual is so-called a heterozygote, then the mutated APOL1 gene acts as a very good defense against sleeping sickness. If such a faulty mutation is present twice in the genome and the individual is so-called a homozygote, then the result is actually undesirable and increases the individual's risk of chronic kidney failure. According to the dominant evolutionary theory, that is, Darwinism, mutations are random and natural selection picks those that are simply the most suitable for a given environment so that the organism is as well adapted as possible. In other words, evolution creates randomly and in all directions, and natural selection only chooses. According to Darwinism, mutations occur everywhere in the DNA with the same probability at the same rate. If that were not the case, it would mean that evolution might not be as blind as we think. Recently, it has become clear that the randomness of mutations is somewhat more complicated. The first signs came from the work of researcher Gray Monroe from the University of California in Davis, who, together with colleagues in 2022, made a scandalous discovery in the thiol cress Arabidopsis thaliana, that the organism somehow mysteriously determines which mutations it needs and then somehow induces them. It's a stunning discovery and at the same time a problem because it revives the spirit of Lamarckism. Lamarckism proclaims the inheritance of traits acquired during life. In simple terms, that a blacksmith's children should have big muscles. Another important discovery was published by Adi Livnat from the University of Haifa, who came up with a somewhat extravagant theory that goes beyond natural selection with random mutations as well as beyond Lamarckism. He claims that natural selection acts as an external evolutionary force, which he calls the external force, while within the genome there is a kind of internal evolutionary force, the internal force, which ensures that mutations appear more often where the genome simply allows it. It's certainly not that the genome is somehow thinking. Rather, various genetic, molecular, and physical factors come into play, influencing the probabilities of mutations. For a long time this wasn't possible, but now we are able to track the emergence of new mutations in the genome. And it was precisely the aforementioned Adi Livnat and his colleagues who recently looked at the previously mentioned APOL1 gene and found that its mutation conferring resistance to sleeping sickness appears in the genomes of Africans more frequently than in Europeans. It's as if the genome knows that this mutation is more needed in Africa because sleeping sickness is common there, whereas in Europe we don't have sleeping sickness. It's as if it knows which mutation it needs and mutates purposefully in that direction. A mutation in the APOL1 gene would produce heterozygotes who are much more resistant to sleeping sickness than healthy homozygotes, that is, people with both normal copies of the APOL1 gene. At the same time, however, it is also possible that such a situation is more related to the long history of co-evolution with sleeping sickness, to which people in Africa are exposed. In any case, it's an interesting topic for further research. That's all for today. We've talked about a few interesting facts from genetics, specifically about how mutations might not always be entirely random, as demonstrated by the gene that plays a role in resistance to sleeping sickness. In the next episode, we'll continue with more interesting questions from genetics and evolution. I'm looking forward to seeing you. If you enjoy my storytelling, I'd be grateful for a like and for subscribing to my channel. I really appreciate your support. Thank you and bye-bye.